In this video, we'll take a look at some of the debugging features that come with Visual Studio Code. I do realize that some of you might not be using the same editor, but if your editor does come with some of the basic debug features, they should still be very similar and the concepts still should apply. Up until now, we've been using NodeMon to run our server. Let's stop it. So I'll go in the terminal and terminate batch job by pressing Ctrl+C in Windows. Instead, we'll be using the Visual Studio Code debug runner. So I'll click on the little bug icon on the left, or you can hit Ctrl+Shift+D. And now we can see a Start Debugging button. If we hit play, it will start our server.js in debug mode. This gives us several tools. Let's go over to our app post messages function on line 27, and then let's add a breakpoint on the try. Then let's go back to our web app and post a new message. And you can see that a breakpoint has been triggered. We can now do things like see our local variables, hover over any of the variables. We can see our call stack and trace it. And then we can just continue. Next, let's post yet another message. And if we wanted to follow along as the code continues, instead of pressing continue, which will just give us the end result as we saw earlier, which is our error exception, we can step over. And this will take us line by line through our code, and we can see where we end up. In this case, the next line that gets executed is the catch since the exception was thrown. At this point, we'll send a status of 500. Then we'll console log an error. And then finally, we get to our finally block. And let's try that one more time, so we'll post yet another message. This time, we'll look at the debug console. And we have access to the current scope of our code. So if I type in REQ for the request, we can see the request is actually displayed here as if we had console logged it. We can do other things as well, including execute code. So I could type in response.send and type hi. And let's try it one more time. So I've restarted our debugger, and I will post a new message. And once again, the same breakpoint will trigger. This time, let's look into stepping into. And the throw will cause us to step into the catch, so that's no different than stepping over. But now if we step into response.send status, we'll actually end up in the code and function responsible for sending the status. And so anytime we end up in a function and we step into it, we'll go to that function in our code, whether it's code we created or code we're using. So for now, I'll go back to the top and I'll take off the breakpoint, and then I'll take out the throw from line 30. In the past, as we've been developing our demo app, there's been several occasions where we've used a console log to test functionality before we continue implementing the full functionality. In those cases, it would have been good to use the debug tools, since we could have added a breakpoint. And instead of adding a console log, we can see, did we hit that breakpoint? Are we getting there? What values are we getting by hovering over them? It gives us a lot more information than the console log could ever give us. There's also some nice add-ons for Visual Studio Code that allow it to connect with the browser. In that case, we could actually debug the JavaScript on our front end, and then it would communicate with Visual Studio Code to allow us to step through or over or use the other debug tools. Now that we have a good idea of exception handling and debugging, next let's take a look at testing.